Mic check, 1, 2, 3. Welcome to the TheGripPodcast. I'm your host, Matthew Sky Osborne. Here on episode, I'm not sure, I should know better. Maybe like 18 or something like that of the TheGripPodcast. We're going to have guest Leah back today, and we're going to go back and redefine some terms and explain some things, because last time we spoke, we got a lot of interesting feedback from people, so we want to go back and make sure we explain what we're talking about. You can follow the Grip Podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, Google, Stitcher. If you go to, I think, go to skyent.live, and you can see all the links there, or go to the Instagram, The Grip Podcast. Also on Facebook, The Grip Podcast. You can get your Be Humane wristbands right here, also at skyent.live. They're $5. The point of the Be Humane wristband is to bring attention to things that we need to be better at in society and in humanity. Your Be Humane issue could be anything. It could be global warming, could be racism, could be white supremacy, could be, Donald Trump and shutting him down and what he believes and stands for. Shutting down the border wall, government shutdown, healthcare. It could be anything. So, you get those, they're $5, and you wear them. People ask you what it is, and you can tell them, and it's supposed to be a conversation starter. That's really it. We're going to go ahead and jump right into it. What I want to do here is I'm going to go ahead and do the playlist shuffle and have a bit of fun real quick before we get started. It's not as fun when you do it by yourself or where there's nobody in the room with you. So here we go. Go to my playlist. Please, God, don't let anything silly come up. It's the whole point of this. Here we go. Oh, okay. Well, I guess I have mixed feelings about this. Travis Scott performing at the Super Bowl. This is Coffee Bean. I like the song. Until Colin Kaepernick is, treated fairly and the NFL acknowledges the issues at hand and deals with them in a realistic way. It doesn't just try to sweep it under the rug, which they tried to do several times and it didn't work, because you can't suppress humanity. We're going to fight back all the time and make our point. So I think Jay-Z, Pink, Rihanna, and a few other people turned down the Super Bowl performance, but Travis Scott, and I think now Big Boy is doing it. They're doing the Super Bowl with Maroon 5. Not sure what that's about, and I'm sure if you've been on social media, you've seen some of the pushback that artists like Jay-Z and other people have been giving Travis Scott and Big Boy for doing the performance at halftime. I really haven't been watching the NFL or supporting it for my personal reasons, because I don't think that you can mistreat black people and expect them to support you. That's my stance. I just look at it as like a relationship. Both people have to come into the relationship equally and respect each other. You can't have one disrespecting the other and the other one just sits down and take it. If you're in that relationship, I think you leave if you're being mistreated. So I look at business relationships that way. I look at a lot of relationships that way. Don't like being mistreated. And it doesn't stop, with relationships, romantic relationships. I think it moves on to, like I said, the NFL and business relationships. So treat us with respect. So I probably won't be watching the Super Bowl. I'm not going to support it. All right. We're going to go ahead and call Leah. Give me just a second, make sure she's ready. Sorry for the dead air. Turn that down. Turn this back up. And once she replies here, we'll go ahead and get into it. I've really been looking forward to this follow-up episode. I think I'm going to have Leah on here as a guest probably quite a few times. She's really informative, really helpful. I'm actually learning a lot by working with her, and she's actually helping me on another project. I'm working on a short film, and she helped me with that. And that's going to be called Be Honest, and I think we're filming in April about an interracial couple having some problems. It's a short. It's not going to be like a full feature film. That's right. All right, she's ready. Let's go ahead and locate her in my contacts. This narrating is awesome, I think. Here we go.
Hey.
Hello.
Back for more, huh?
Back for more.
How's it going?
It's going pretty good. Just so you know, we're live
Okay.
on the podcast.
Nice.
Not sure why I'm going to do this to myself again. No, I'm just
A
kidding.
glutton for punishment, huh?
No, it's fine. And even since I was talking briefly before you came on and letting them know that I plan to continue to have you on, and you're not going away. So, you know.
So if you don't like her, get used to it.
Get used to it or bounce.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay.
It's nice to know you got my back.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so I don't remember the last time we talked, but we obviously have been keeping in touch. And I have been speaking to more white people about the podcast.
Unsurprisingly.
Yeah.
You mean since the last time we talked?
Since the last time we talked. Like as soon as like last night. As recent as last night. And it was funny. I was noticing a pattern.
Yes, those always pop up.
Yeah.
Sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Algorithms, no. I noticed a pattern. The white people that got it and understood what you were saying, they all listened to the whole podcast.
Right.
The ones that didn't get it, guess what?
Listen to a portion of it.
Listen to a portion of it.
Yeah.
Or a clip I posted.
Right.
And they tried to start to have a healthy debate with me
right.
about a clip.
Having heard like 1/10 of it or 1/20th or whatever.
Yeah, and I'm like, I was like, I don't even know how to have this conversation with you because you don't even know what you're talking about.
Right. Go listen to the whole thing first, and then we can maybe chat.
Yeah, and so I think that was interesting and kind of revealing, and it kind of went back to what you were saying, how some want to do the work, some don't want to do the work.
Yeah.
As simple as just sitting down and listening to a podcast.
Right.
Couldn't do it.
Yep. Yeah.
What's that
Which
about?
it is long.
Well,
but I'm not excusing anyone.
you could do it while you're driving. You could do it while you're at
True.
work. You know, if
A couple
you can.
people I talked to, they're like, I had to do it in 10-minute increments. I was like, thank you for your perseverance.
Yeah. And
that is an interesting observation.
Right. And I'm not going to say that's like, because I need to be clear about this because I don't want to run into the same issues, but that's probably inevitable. I'm not saying that is exclusive to white people. I think that's like society today. I feel like people's attention spans are kind of short. I struggle with that a little bit personally. So
Sure.
you know.
Well, and I don't think I think attention span is part of it, but I think also a lot of people are just really quick to get defensive. And I think that that is partially just human nature. Like I struggle with that. Like,
Right.
I don't want to be somebody who gets defensive, but sometimes I am super sensitive and whatever. But I think especially in these kind of topics, and especially with kind of the national conversation, the things that are happening and conversations that are happening, I think it's even heightened that for a lot of folks, right? To just jump to being defensive before they've even really tried to understand what's happening or
Right.
And I also think, and I promise I don't mean this to be derogatory or maybe anyways, I always think about this quote that's like, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And we've kind of talked about this a little bit before. I think often, that's for sure been the case for me. Like I when I started my grad program in Black Studies, I wanted to focus on, for my area of study, my thesis, I was like, I'm going to compare racial history between, like, racism between South Africa and the US, which is like so big and so broad and so, like, really, like, you little, like, master's student, like, you're gonna cover all that in a 60 to 100 page thesis, really? So it's like but as I got further into both of those areas, right, I realized, oh my gosh, like, I don't know anything, like, this is huge. There's so many different facets. And so I think often, unfortunately, sometimes you get that happening in these issues too, right? That people are just kind of, maybe the people that don't know as much about some of these areas are more convinced that they have the answers, and it's easy to just get defensive, and it's like not even realizing they don't, how much they don't know. And again, I don't mean that to be insulting to anyone, but I just think it happens a lot.
And I've been having a lot of conversations with people in person and on social media here recently. And I think, I wonder if this, I know it does. I'm kind of curious, I guess, to get your opinion about it. Have you heard the term cancel culture?
Yes.
Where, like, like, you'll have Kevin Hart, or you'll have somebody and they'll say something off the cuff and it won't be fully thought out. And then everybody's like, oh, they're done. We're done with Kevin Hart, or we're done with this person. They're fired, they're whatever. And I heard Dave Chappelle say this on one of his stand-ups, and I don't think I talked to you about this. Does this sound familiar?
No.
Okay. All my conversations in my head are like weaving together. I'm like, wait, who did I say this to? And Dave Chappelle was talking about the Me Too movement. And he was talking about how you have men who support the movement and support women, but are scared to come out and support them in fear of being accused of something that they may have said off the cuff, or for fear of speaking out of turn or something. And he used the term imperfect allies. He's like, we're going to have imperfect allies in all of these movements that we have. I don't know why people are walking around. This is me talking here. I don't know why people are walking around looking for unicorns. Where they're looking for these, like, perfect people who haven't made any mistakes or haven't said anything stupid.
Right.
And I think that plays into, like, this conversation where, like, you're going to have a white person that says something crazy or stupid. You're going to have a black person that says something crazy or stupid. And it seems like we're not okay with that.
Well, I might have a little different take on that.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, I'll just put this out there. For the most part, like, I don't know that I'm thinking of that when you say cancel culture. I had certain incidents that come to mind,
Okay.
right? Where someone's gotten called out for something or gotten fired. And they may be different. I think that they might be different examples than what you're thinking of,
Yeah, if
right?
they're
So I'm
saying
thinking of,
if they're saying like extreme like stuff they should not be saying, like if they're saying something racist or you know what I mean, that's I'm not referring to those kind of comments.
okay.
Yeah, I'm referring
Okay.
to I don't know, like I don't know what did Kevin Hart say. I don't know what he said, but he made a joke I think about gay people or something. He realized he made a mistake. I'm just going off of what I've heard him say. I don't know personally, obviously. He apologized. He's like, I'm actually for, that community. I support that community. I vote for that community when elections come up, and I do what I can to support it. I made a mistake.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I definitely think, I mean, none of us are perfect, right? Like I talked on our last podcast about stuff I used to say, right? We're all learning. We're all, well, not all of us, but those of us who are trying, right, to learn and grow and be better. Like that's a lifelong process. There isn't a state where we can say, I know everything there is to know about every single community that is different from me in the world, right? That's just not going to happen.
Right.
So I agree with you there, but I think there does need to be accountability, because I think for a really long time, like hundreds of years, there hasn't been that accountability often. And especially when you're talking about things like sexism or racism, kind of back to what we talked about last time, those things are so entrenched. Homophobia, those things are so entrenched in our society, that in our world, that comedians or whomever, like people have been able to say whatever they want to say and just play it off like a joke. I think especially just since you brought up the world of comedy, right? I think that's an especially interesting area and problematic area, right? Where comedians have been able to say whatever they want to say in the name of, well, it's just joking. And it's like, yeah, but it isn't. Like, is everybody taking what you're saying completely as a joke, or are people actually internalizing some of what you're saying and you're normalizing, these attitudes? So I don't know. Like, I think.
Do you think that kind of like plays in the gaslighting to an extent?
Yeah, like what we talked about in the area I grew up in, right? So I think it is a balance. I think there needs to be a balance of accountability, and because of the nature, what I said about, this super long history of very little accountability in these areas, I think sometimes the pendulum has to swing. Like, if the pendulum is really far, like in an extreme, like one direction, often it does swing out a little bit too far the other direction in seeking a balance. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I'm not even saying that I feel like the pendulum is swung too far in the direction of like accountability or call out. I know a lot of people who think that it has, but I don't even know that I land there. But
No,
like I said,
I guess it would. That. Not
I
with
guess
the,
it would
not with this
depend on.
topic.
I guess it would depend on. I would need to like look at specific examples. I'm speaking like generally, but I think I would need to look at each example of like, okay, this happened. This is how, this person's employer dealt with this, or society dealt with this, and I would need to look at like the nuances of each situation, I guess. But I think
case.
Yeah, but I think in general, the accountability is what we need, because like, as I was thinking about this the last couple days, like white supremacy, sexism, all of these things that have been patriarchy, homophobia, these things that have been the status quo, the norm in this country for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And again, around the world, those white supremacy excuses itself, right? That's part of how it continues to function. There's always a justification. There's always an excuse. There's always, and you hear this just in common everyday, conversations. Like, I heard this my whole life. Like, if someone says or does something racist, well, there's always an excuse. Well, they're just old. That's just the era they grew up in, or they're just ignorant, or they just don't know any better, or well, they had good intentions. They didn't mean, it wasn't intentional. Like there's always an excuse. So where then do we have accountability for someone to change if there's always an excuse? And so I guess I tend to look at these things more like it's bringing some very needed accountability. Does that mean every situation is handled perfectly? No, probably not. But I think in general, the more accountability around these issues, the better. And I guess we could discuss like pros and cons of how these different situations are handled, like I said, on a more case by case basis. But there's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, I'm literally writing down what you just said as you were saying it. I was writing down, discussing what that actually looks like in each scenario. So we're kind of on the same page there. That's interesting. That's all I was saying.
And I kind of find it, I mean, confession for me, I think some of the ways society, just like, again, average, everyday people are handling some of these incidents. I mean, I find great amusement in some of them. Like I'm thinking about, there was this lawyer, I don't know, 4 or 5, 6 months ago, this white lawyer in, I think it was New York.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Do you remember this? Just like went off at some fast food restaurant about someone speaking Spanish. I think it might have even been like a Mexican restaurant or something.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I remember this guy.
Right. And then there was this public outrage, as there should be, because he was being very verbally abusive and racist,
they taped
right?
him. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was all caught on tape. And then the next thing I heard, there was like a mariachi band and taco trucks that were like camped outside his office
in his residence, I think, maybe
playing music and selling tacos. Like, okay, you want to be hateful and crazy? Well, we're gonna be us and do us like in your face, And so I mean, personally, I'm like, power to the people. Like, this is creative. This is awesome. This is like taking a stance, but doing it in a way that's also funny but get your point across.
Yeah. There was another video of him. They caught him on the street somewhere and he was trying to hide his identity.
Like behind the umbrella.
Something like that. And then he got to a street corner and the camera was trying to pan around to his face, and then he just darted off down the street, running from the
that. They were kind of harassing him a little bit. Why are you hiding, bro? Like, if you haven't done anything wrong, why are you hiding from us? He was hiding behind an umbrella, I think. Yeah.
This is America. Speak English. Like, what?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm like, before we get too far into the weeds here, I'm like, okay,
that's what we do, right?
I'm like, let's see if we can go back and talk about what I had discussed with you as far as trying to identify some of the language we're going to be using in terms or whatnot. And for those of you who don't know, hopefully you've listened to the last episode, and I think I was saying to you off the podcast how I didn't know exactly what I was getting into. So
it's okay.
We just started
feel that way with me.
Yeah, so we just started talking and we just jumped into it, and then after it was over, it seemed like some of the people that got it were fairly intelligent people, and I wouldn't say that. Oh, damn it! I'm gonna get in trouble here.
I'm like, oops, you just said it. It's okay. I already said something at the very beginning that's probably going to piss people off. So,
yeah, and I don't mean it in the way it may sound.
Right, exactly. You're not trying to bash on anyone or be arrogant or.
No, you just have people that can receive information. They're on all different kind of levels,
Or they're further along in their process of learning about these issues, right?
Right. And so just to kind of add clarity to I think some of the things we're going to be talking about for however long we do this, I I'd like to see if we can kind of make this hopefully like a reference episode where
Okay.
like we're in the future, we're like, okay, go back and check out episode blah 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 if you want more information on like these terms or whatnot.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then you were asking me, you were like, okay, so like what kind of terms? And I was like, I don't know. Like I just know
Don't worry, I have plenty of them.
Okay. But like, just for example, like when you say white supremacy, I know what you mean. You know what you mean.
Yeah.
They think KKK.
Okay.
And that is a version of white supremacy, but
one of the most extreme versions.
right. So I don't know how you want to do this. I don't know if you just want to dig into what you have. It sounds like you have something already.
Okay, yeah. So, well, first of all, let me put this out there.
Okay.
And I don't mean this in any sort of derogatory way either. I'm all about education. I'm all about like, meeting people where they are. But we also live in the information age, right? Where all these terms have like dictionary definitions. All these terms have innumerable articles written about them. So, I'm just throwing that out there for folks. Not that we're not going to delve into it here. And I know people are different types of learners. Some people like to research and Google stuff. Other people, it's easier in a conversational format. But I'm just saying, if you come across a term, that you don't know exactly what that means, or even if you think you know what it means, Google it. And obviously, try to, go to some reputable, make sure your sources look decent or look reputable. But, I'm just throwing that out there. We're probably in the course of these episodes going to talk about a lot of terminology that's new. And so, that's kind of where putting your work in comes in too.
Right.
So anyways, that's kind of my little spiel, but let's dig into this. So white supremacy and people thinking about the KKK. So white supremacy, like most things in life, right? It's a spectrum. So the KKK is on, one of the most extreme ends of the spectrum, but white supremacy can manifest in lots of less extreme ways. We talked about some of those on the last episode. I'm trying to think, I guess maybe I could just throw out some examples, and this is probably this could lead into a whole nother conversation, but some ways that will resonate, that will feel relevant to people, ways that white supremacy manifests. One thing that comes to mind is all lives matter. So on the surface, right, if you just take that phrase out of context, all lives matter sounds legit, sounds like, yeah, of course all lives matter. We're all part of the human race. We all bleed red, however people want to express that. But you have to look at everything in context, right? So all lives matter emerged as a response to what?
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter, right? And Black Lives Matter is a phrase that is getting at the fact that Black lives don't matter enough in this country. They don't matter as much as white lives. So then when this kind of rebuttal phrase, white lives matter, is thrown in there, what that's actually being used to do is take attention away from, trying to highlight the oppression that Black folks in this country still face. And so that's a way that people are still, a way that's not the KKK, right? Today, that folks are supporting white supremacy. That's a white supremacist phrase because of the way it's being used. But if you want to take white supremacy back to, maybe just like a definition of what it is, white supremacy is an ideology, right? It's a set of beliefs. Like we talked about last time with the whole when we were talking about these fields of knowledge, right? And how, in the field of psychology, it was like, oh, we've studied the brains, that the brains of white folks, and we've studied the brains of black folks, and we've, determined that white folks are just, genetically more intelligent, like some of that kind of stuff. So way back in the day, that's how white supremacy developed. It developed out of this, there's different names for it, like scientific racism, but really it's pseudoscience, right? It's false science. It's now proven that those, scientifically proven that those studies were false. They are illegitimate, but that's what, one example of where this belief system of white supremacy came out of. And then, of course, when we talk about white supremacy, we have to talk about its relationship to power, right? So it's not just this set of beliefs and this ideology, it's the set of beliefs that's used to justify dominating other races. I know we just jumped like right into the deep end again. I know that this was supposed to help simplify it for people, right? But now we're like, here we are swimming in the deep end again.
Yeah.
But let me stop there and get some feedback from you.
Yeah, I mean, you are saying, I like that you brought up all lives matter. Because like you're saying that it's looked at to some as an innocent thing. And
right.
Like you said, it was a rebuttal to Black Lives Matter. And you're like, well, why do you have to do that?
Right.
Nobody's saying that. Nobody's saying all lives. We know that.
Right.
Right. And so that's interesting because like that and then like Blue Lives Matter.
Right.
It's like, okay.
Which is even taking it further on the spectrum, right? Talking about the spectrum of racism or white supremacy, I feel like. I mean, they're both, Blue Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, kind of doing the same thing, but I feel like Blue Lives Matter is even taking it further. Like it's directly, like one of the main things Black Lives Matter is targeting, right, is police murder of civilians, of especially black civilians. And so Blue Lives Matter is directly saying, like, we stand with police, but in this context, it's not just we stand with police. It's like we're on the side of this brutality. Like that's what it says to me. And I know a lot of white folks that say or have the flag with the blue stripe, they wouldn't say that that's what they're doing.
No.
But in this context, that is what that is doing. That's what that's saying.
Yeah. And when I have those conversations with people like about Blue Lives Matter, for example, Blue Lives Matter to me was scary. Like it was scary to me and some of my friends because like you'll drive down the street and you'll see like blue ribbons tied around trees and stuff.
Right.
And I was like, oh shit. Like this is scary. And I don't even know all the ways I can articulate how it was scary.
Well, because I just read an article the other day and I was like, damn, that was comparing the Blue Lives Matter, what's the word I'm looking for? symbol to the Confederate flag. It's like what that stands for, what the Confederate flag stood for in its time and still stands for today. And what Blue Lives Matter stands for, it stands for white supremacy. It stands against the protection and equality of black folks. So that's white supremacy.
So, yeah, it was scary because of what you're saying. And, like, Black Lives Matter was demonized so quickly. And the powers that be, whoever they are, were trying to turn it into this is like a terrorist group. We're like, what? And because you with anything, you'll get violent people in any group. Right. And so there were violent people in Black Lives Matter. And I'm not saying that wasn't the thing, but that's not Black Lives Matter, Right, as a whole. As a whole. And so if I could just say, like, what was scary to me and my friends about Blue Lives Matter was, we had a cop that lived next to us growing up, and he was a nice guy. He was a great guy. He helped us out. He was friendly with me and my brothers. He was a good cop. And I think there's this like idea out there that black people hate police.
Right.
And that we don't like police and we don't need police. And that's another thing that's been put, like, we never said that. Like, y'all put that on us.
Right.
You know, what some of our issues are, why don't the good cops speak out about the bad cops? Like, why do you guys protect each other? And if you're sitting here trying to tell me there's not a culture of protection within the police, then I'm like, you're lying.
Right.
I know people who've been in the police who've told me about it. You know what I mean? Like, it's a thing. It's real. I've even heard the term, the police are the biggest gang in the United States.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so they have
There's a
power.
severe lack of accountability.
Right. And, there's this group here in Dallas that we support and we're a part of. It's called Mothers Against Police Brutality. Mm-hmm. And in these meetings, they talk about just some wild things as far as the law is concerned that cops are allowed to get away with, as far as, I'm not going to quote this accurately, but it's something to the effect of, like, you know, if there's a police shooting of a citizen, something like the police have like 48 hours before they're required to give a statement, and they can refuse like a drug test. And there's like all these protections in place to protect the police, you know, but nothing to protect the citizens.
Right.
Okay.
So you have this group of people with power, with weapons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And very little accountability. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's a recipe for disaster, right?
Yeah. So when you're driving around town and you see like these blue ribbons tied around trees, like, for black people, that's scary, because
That's
it's
terrifying.
like, oh man, like it almost gives the bad ones more rope to do what they want to do.
Right. It empowers them.
Empowers
like, these
them.
people are on my side, and I already can almost do whatever I want and get away with it. And now, like, society's telling me, like, reinforcing that.
Yeah. Now, if somebody said to me, Blue Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter, and I see a black and blue ribbon tied up on the tree, then I might be like, okay. I mean, I can talk to you. Let's see where you're at, you know? But it seems to be very tribal, you know? It's like one or the other. And like, black people that I know will say, obviously, Black Lives Matter. And we'll also say we respect the police. And nobody's saying get rid of the police. We're saying get rid of the bad ones, and the good ones need to step up and call out the bad ones. So
yeah.
that's where
and I
we're
mean,
coming from.
There's so many issues, like, we could get into there.
And we just kind
I
of
don't
went
know
down
if
a
we
rabbit hole there.
want to or not. Yeah. But I think, you know, and I mentioned this last time, you also, again, context and history, right? When you're saying, you know, people think, you know, black folks hate the police, and that's not true. It's like, but there is a history there, and there can be some animosity there for good reason.
Oh,
like,
yeah, it's warranted.
Like I mentioned,
it's extremely warranted.
Right. If people do see that from black folks toward police, right? Like, we have this whole, I mean, like I mentioned before, the history of how law enforcement even got started in this country was the policing of black bodies, like controlling the slave populations. And this was especially true in the South. I don't know. I would need to look into that to see if it was the same in the North. But yeah, it was like, we need a way to help slave owners control their slave populations who are trying to escape, right? And for obviously, like, for good reason, right? They were being brutalized.
Right.
And so that was a big part of why law enforcement, or maybe the main reason, I'm not sure, but was created, was to help police black bodies and keep enslaved black folks under the control of these slave owners. And so when you talk about that history, you know, and then you get into more modern day times of Black communities continuing to be over policed, and how implicit bias plays in with who police are targeting and who they're pulling over. And then you get into like the drug wars and everything that's been proven and that's come out in recent years about the corruption there, and how Black communities were demonized, and you know, drugs were planted and all that to criminalize Black populations. I mean, there's this whole like crazy history that can sound like conspiracy theory. Mm-hmm. You know, it sounds so crazy. You're like, no, not the US. Right. But it's like you really start looking into these things, and it's like, you know, a lot of times I feel like as people that were involved in these things when they were younger, as they get older, they feel like they're on their deathbed. You know, like sometimes you get these deathbed confessions, right? Where people, as they get older and they feel like, okay, I'm not going to go to prison now. And maybe I've lived with this guilty conscience for 50 years. Yeah. And they, you know, start like confessing these things. And there's been a lot of that that's happened regarding a lot of those things I just mentioned, where people that worked for the FBI or whatever have said, yeah, this is what we were doing. I was one of the main people in charge of this. And so when you look at all these different factors, it's like, yeah, Black folks have a reason to not trust police if that's how they feel. Mm-hmm. They have a reason to feel suspicious. They have a reason to feel angry. And even like today, like look at all these cases of Black folks who are killed by police. Look at all the freaking cover-ups. How many times, almost every single case, the police officer or their colleagues, other fellow police officers, are trying to like, you know, plant a weapon on the person or lie. Oh, they were charging at me, when really like later the autopsy proves they were shot in the back. Or, right. You know what I'm saying? Like hide the video camera, the tape of the incident. I mean, there's all of this corruption. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, we saw that with Walter Scott, right, in South Carolina, where mm-hmm. the police officer walked over. He didn't know he was being filmed, and dropped, what was it, a gun or dropped something right by him, just casually, right? Didn't know he was being filmed. We see that in Tamir Rice, like one of the most like heartbreaking. I mean, they're all heartbreaking, but mm-hmm. you know, this 12-year-old child, and the police are like, oh, we yelled at him a bunch of times to, you know, he was playing with this toy, like a BB gun. Oh yeah, we told him this X many times to put the gun down. And then the videotape comes out, and they literally didn't even stop the car before they just gunned him down. Yeah. Like a freaking drive-by shooting, mm-hmm. literally, the police. You know, so I don't know. It's just like, yeah, if like Black folks have a reason. Right. For the mistrust, if that is something that Black folks feel. You know, there's a whole history behind that I think a lot of times white folks and even other non-Black communities of color are very ignorant about. And we just have been, it's kind of like the way we're brainwashed to look at military in this country. And I'm not trying to down people that serve in the military, but there's this national narrative where we kind of have this like hero worship around people who serve in the military. And that same thing is cultivated in this country around police. And I'm not saying there aren't, you know, those jobs do take courage. Like people are putting their lives on the line. But that national narrative of this like hero worship is cultivated because that helps the state do what the state needs to do without, and what the state wants to do without getting so much backlash from everyday people. If they can develop this narrative of like, oh, people who serve in the military are heroes and gods and whatever, and the police respect them, right? That helps them control the population, or that helps the U.S. be able to go to these other countries and get oil and kill people for it, but pretend like they're doing something else, right? So that's part of the national, right? That's part of the national narrative that helps this country be patriotic and be loyal towards their state and the people who work for the state. So anyways, those are things I think a lot of times people aren't thinking about. And I know I just opened like 25,000 cans of worms there in like 2 minutes.
No, but yeah, it was we were kind of talking around white supremacy and white supremacy, and how you were defining it and giving examples of ways it manifests itself.
Yes.
And so I think those are good points. Okay, so what else you got? So you got, or was that what you wanted to say about I guess kind of defining white supremacy and what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 1,000 different ways it manifests. But I don't know that it's necessary to go through all those examples. I mean,
so
I don't know.
So what were you saying again when you were kind of giving a definition of it? I don't recall.
Yeah, so it's basically it's an ideology, a set of beliefs that is tied to power, right? It's tied to being used to justify the oppression of people of color. And I mean, it's basically centered around what we talked about last time, that white folks are intellectually, physically, emotionally, whatever, in all these ways superior to other folks and people of color, and that's why it's okay to oppress them, right? So this was kind of an ideology that was needed to justify slavery, right? Because, you know, people have, if you're like a healthy person, you have a conscience, right? Unless you're like a psychopath or sociopath, right? You have a conscience, right? People could look at slavery and look at everything that was happening and see that these people are human beings and be like, something about this doesn't feel right, you know? And so it's like people needed to jump through all these hoops in their head to justify why it was okay to enslave Black folks, right? And so that's what white supremacy functioned as and continues to function as, right? We don't have the enslavement of Black folks in this country in the way, well, not in the same way that we did a couple hundred years ago, but we still have the oppression of people of color. And that's still how white supremacy functions. It's still used to justify. So another example, right? Take Islamophobia, right? So that's another way that white supremacy manifests, right? These people are different and they're terrorists and their religion is violent and blah, blah, blah. And so, that's white supremacy. Like, we're white, we're better than, we're not violent like these people are just naturally violent because of their religious beliefs. And so we're going to use that to make all these discriminatory laws or attack Muslim people or bomb mosques or same with a lot of immigration laws, right? Another example of white supremacy, right? Here's these, like I just heard recently that statistics show that more crime is committed by people coming through our northern borders than our southern borders in this country.
Yeah, there's actually a piece about that on CNN when they had somebody up on the Canadian border, and I thought that was quite hilarious. Not like not in a ha-ha funny way, but but it's like there's no wall up there.
Right. We're not talking about building a northern wall because those are mostly white folks that are migrating from up there. So then let's look at what's really behind this then. If statistics are showing us that, all this rhetoric about these people are criminals and racist and this and that, if that's not true, then what is really true? Well, these are brown folks mostly coming from our southern borders. So that's what's really going on here.
Right.
That's really the root issue. So
I don't know if this was on your list, but it seems like a nice segue. Cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance. This is one of my favorite terms. And my least favorite.
I mean, because you're talking about it and how they do what they do to these humans.
Right. Cognitive dissonance. Where do I even start with that? Why don't you tell me?
No, go ahead.
Well, you tell me what made you think of that term?
I don't know how or when I learned about that. The thing is about cognitive dissonance, like it's almost like we knew what was happening, and when I heard that term, I was like, oh, that's just putting words to what we've always known.
Right, putting language to this reality.
But it's the thing where you'll have I don't know, like what's a good example? Like let's say there's a riot. Hurricane Katrina. I think this is what I remember. Hurricane Katrina. They would talk about the black people as looters.
Right.
And the white people were survivors.
Right.
That's what it is, I mean, I don't know. I guess that's the simplest example I could think of. Like, you would see, like, on the news, and it would be that kind of language. And we're like, wait, what?
Right.
But it's always stuff like that, where they're calling us this, and they're calling white people that. And it's always demonizing black people, and it almost justifies the behavior that we get from, law enforcement or whoever it is.
Right. There's always this double standard. Mm-hmm. Right. When people of color behave this certain way, we label it this, and language matters.
Yeah.
Right. Language matters a lot, like a lot. I even thought of that when, when you use the word riot, it's like when black folks are protesting something, it's a riot.
It's a riot.
But if white folks are there, it's like a demonstration or a
demonstration.
Protest, or they're just like celebrating, if it's over like some sports team that wins. I mean, like I lived in you're from Ohio. I went to Ohio State.
Oh yeah.
Fans will go crazy over like
cars.
Flip cars, light dumpsters on fire, like all this crazy stuff that's like damaging property, but nobody's saying, oh, look at these looters, look at these thugs, look at these rioters, like, oh, they're celebrating.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, really? Is that really what you call that? Because if those were people of color, that's not the language you would be using to describe that, But yeah, cognitive dissonance, I actually have kind of a funny story. When I was a freshman in college and came to school up here in Chicago, the little like opening week speech from the president of the university, I remember he used that term and he offered like $20 to anybody in the room, and it was all freshmen, who could define cognitive dissonance, which at the time I was like, those are two really big words. Like, and then you just put them together. I have no idea what you're talking about. So nobody else did either. Nobody got the $20. And then like years later, that term came up again. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the term. I could have gotten $20 if I'd known this like 10 years ago. Anyways.
Yeah.
But yeah, cognitive dissonance. So let me just break it down because it is a big term, right? So cognitive obviously like refers to the brain, thinking, ideas, that sort of thing. And dissonance is basically this idea when two things come together and they don't seem to work together. So there's this clash, right? This conflict, this tension. So cognitive dissonance is basically like if a person holds an idea or a thought or a belief, and then information comes along that doesn't align and doesn't support these beliefs they hold, there's this tension, right, that people go through, like, and they experience what we call cognitive dissonance, right? There's this disconnect, like, wait a minute, I believe X, but now there's this study or this person's telling me something that totally goes against that, and now I'm confused and now I'm conflicted because I don't know what to think now, And so I think this happens a lot in conversations around anything having to do with race. Because like we talked about last podcast, people have, in this country, it's pretty much impossible to not internalize white supremacy or racist beliefs, because it's so ingrained in our society. Like I always like to say, it's in the air we breathe. And so when people start being confronted with information that goes against these deeply held beliefs, it can cause, right, a lot of discomfort, a lot of just internal conflict. And so that's what people mean by cognitive dissonance, because now you're at a crossroads, right? Am I going to investigate this new information and then rework my initial beliefs and try to figure out what's really true, or am I just going to dig my heels in, like this is too uncomfortable for me and this is too makes me feel too unstable, or this is too upsetting, and I'm just going to like dig my heels in and just reject this new information. And I think that's what a lot of people do in order to get rid of this dissonance they feel. I think a lot of times people will just reject the new information. Oh, that can't be true. Or, like you've mentioned before, people will say to you, you're just a black man doing your black thing, right? When you talk about racism. So that's a way that people or the you're just an angry black person, right? So those are ways that people will refute this information that's going against what they believe, instead of actually considering that and chewing on it. They're just gonna, and I get this all the time too. Like people pathologize me all the time. Oh, when I talk about racism, oh, well, you just hate white people, or you're just hurt. You're just injured and you need to heal. And so that therefore everything you're saying is just not true. People will do all these jump through all these mental hoops to hang on to these beliefs that they don't want to rethink. So yes, cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
It's a big thing.
They won't, like you said, they'll make a lot of the excuses so they don't have to deal with it.
Well, and I think it's important to note that cognitive dissonance is actually like a psychological, in psychology, it's a psychological term. Like it's something that psychologists have noticed these patterns and came up with this phrase to describe this pattern of behavior. So, I mean, it's actually like a psychologically proven thing that happens. And like I said, it happens a lot in conversations around racism. So that's why I think this term kind of comes up fairly often in people doing anti-racism work. Yeah.
You'll see it a lot, I see it a lot with you'll see it like with police shootings. For example, like I don't know, when a black person gets shot or a black kid gets shot, they'll put up images of them. They'll find like the worst image they can find.
Right.
And it's like it'll be them with a backwards hat on, and they'll be smoking weed or something, right. Or it'll be them putting up like peace signs and stuff. They're like, see.
Which really has no intrinsic meaning whatsoever. Like people wear their hats backwards all the time.
Yeah.
But they're playing on these stereotypes of black people and black men as quote unquote thugs or whatever.
It's crazy because like we see it and it's so in your face, and we're just like looking at the TV screen with our mouths on the ground, and we're like, you are literally saying it was okay for him to get murdered by the cop.
Right.
That's what you're saying. He deserved it.
Right.
He was a bad person.
Right.
And then you'll hear it in comparison, and this is really bad. But with the white male mass shooter, what we hear a lot in our circles, and when we talk about it, you'll look at the media and they'll have this whole conversation about what went wrong.
Yeah.
What happened to him?
Right.
He had a mental health issue.
He must have had a hard childhood. Or we don't want to ruin his future. He has a bright future, right? Like I'm thinking about, and this isn't necessarily about a police shooting, but I'm thinking about Brock Turner, right?
Yeah.
That young man that sexually assaulted like this woman, and it was like, oh, well, look at what a great swimmer he is, and we don't want to, he has this bright future ahead of him, right? That's not, people aren't giving that to Black folks or other people of color. People aren't worried about their futures. You know?
Yeah.
It's like,
so like I've seen more sympathy for a mass shooter on several occasions than I have for a Black male victim
who was doing nothing wrong.
And it's disgusting.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
And that's, cognitive dissonance. It's like, what happened, you can't, it's so weird. It's so weird to me. It's so weird that, and I don't want to get down and go down another rabbit hole here, but it's just something as simple as skin color. It causes you to change the way you view a human.
Right.
And you're like, I've had it with people I work with, and I want to say it's kind of innocent. I don't know, where we'll be having a conversation about a police shooting, or like here in Dallas, what do we have here? It's where the female cop went into the guy's apartment and shot him.
Right.
And so we'll be talking about that, and then we'll be upset about it, and we've been kind of verbal at work about things that we probably HR would not want us talking about. We're kind of pissed, so
right.
So we talk about it.
Right.
And then you'll have like a coworker come up and say something to the effect of like, well, what was he doing wrong? And they're like, why are you questioning him? Why are you questioning the person who's dead?
Right.
Like, what is that? Like, what is that? Like, what is going on in your brain?
Right. That wouldn't be happening in a different scenario, right? People wouldn't be first questioning a victim, like a murder victim, right?
Yeah.
And you see the same, you mentioned Me Too earlier, the Me Too movement. You see this exact same.
Oh, Brett Kavanaugh?
Well, yeah, it's a whole other story too. Don't get me started. But you see the exact same thing with women who've been victims of sexual assault or rape. It's like the first question that people jump to is like, well, what was she doing, or what was she wearing, or was she drinking, or this or that or the other? And
she invited it.
Yeah, again, it's this why. I mean, that's a way that. Like in the example you mentioned, murderers, or in my example, rapists are kind of covertly being defended, or not so covertly, right? When your first question is to question the actions or the character or the morals of the victim, what does that say? Like, what does that say about you as a person? What does that say about the society we live in? That would be your first thought.
Yeah, that's your go-to position.
That's your go-to. Right. And that is why, people talk about, I don't know if you've heard this, but that we live in a rape culture, much like we live in a white supremacist, racist culture. We also live in a rape culture, which is, again, would be a whole nother topic. But
yeah, agree,
why is that your go-to? Why does that really matter often in these situations? I mean, I agree that the whole context needs to be looked at, but like you said, someone's dead or someone's been raped, and we're picking apart their life rather than the person who committed this heinous crime. Come on.
And what they like to do is they like to find the one example. It happens. This train's never late. I like to say that. Where this train's never late.
Oh, there it is, right on time, every time.
Right on time. And it's
coming
where
into the station.
And they'll find the one example of when it was what they're saying, like
right, exactly.
Like,
and then that applies to every other situation.
Like, one thing I can think of is like Kobe Bryant. The woman had like set him up or something, and she had sex with like 8 other people that day, and they're like, "See, See, she was crazy.
Right.
You see?
Right.
I'm like,
Because
no. That one was crazy.
Right. You can't apply. And of course, those are the situations that sometimes get a lot of like media coverage, but you also get situations like Brock Turner where he's guilty that get a lot of media coverage. I don't think we can say it's just that. But yeah, I quote these statistics. Okay, I think this is really funny. So I'm super nerdy. I'm sure you've picked up on that by now. I call myself a nerd with social skills because I love learning. I love research. And since I got out of grad school, well, actually, this was just like a month or two ago, I cracked myself up. I was joking with this friend about somebody who was arguing with me. Oh, yeah, it was actually a work situation, which I shouldn't go into because I still work there. But somebody was arguing with me. It was over Kavanaugh, the whole Brett Kavanaugh thing. And they were arguing with me, obviously taking a super hardcore, like, pro Kavanaugh stance and basically like insinuating that, these allegations haven't been proven and she's probably lying, exactly what you're talking about. And so I said a few things, but I didn't like go in because, it's that thing like women and people of color have to do sometimes in their workplace. Like sometimes we can't go in the way we want to because, we got to pay these bills. Right. Like, and so I said a few things that were pretty straightforward, but I didn't unleash. And, but I was like venting to a friend afterwards and I was like, don't push me. Like if I come into work tomorrow and you're bringing this up again and in my face about this again, I will come out with some irate statistics. And I was like, OMG. If that doesn't sound nerdy, irate statistics, I don't know what does. but what I was thinking about was what you're saying about this whole idea that like women lie all the time, that's like the norm when women come forward about being assaulted or being raped, when really study after study shows that 92, I believe, to 98% of people who come forward about these kind of things are telling the truth. Right? So we can pretty much, that's a huge percentage of truth tellers. So why is there this, common, why is that a go-to? Oh, she may be lying. She's probably lying. Yeah, it happens, but very, very little, like very few cases is that actually happening.
Yeah, what I like to point out a lot, like when people make arguments with me about things, and they take these weird positions, I often like to take something very familiar to them because that's the only way I could ever really get my point across. I'll take something very familiar to them and I'll put it in and I'll apply it to the situation. And what I mean by example is this. So I've had guys say to me, well, why they come forward now? Okay.
Right.
And you'll always hear that. Why did they come forward then? I was like, okay, I hear you. So, okay, think about this. You ever been in the classroom and your teacher says, you have any more questions? Anybody have any questions? And everybody sits there and they all have a question, but nobody raises their hand. Okay. Then you get one bold person who raises their hand.
Right.
Right. What happens after that? Everybody raises their hand. Everybody starts asking their questions.
Right.
Floodgates open. Why is that? Because they're now comfortable.
Right. Well, and with the issue of sexual assault, like there's so much, again, I could quote my statistics here, like the number, like the percentage of rapists who ever spend like a single day in jail. Like we're not even talking about like an appropriate amount of time. We're talking about even just a single day is, I can't remember if it's less than 2% or less than 1%. So, women, we know, I'm not saying we know in depth, but just being a woman and being in this society, like we've heard the stories, like we've heard stories of women who report and then police don't believe them or their parents don't believe them or they're, or they do go through the legal process and it's horrendous. And I say this as I didn't plan on sharing this today, but I'm a survivor fairly recently.
Mm-hmm.
And I went through I did everything right. Everything that people criticize women, like I immediately went to the police. I immediately went to the hospital and did everything you have to go through there. I went through the justice process, cooperating with everything that they wanted me to do to try to make this a solid case. I actually went through 2 legal processes because the perpetrator was in the military. So I first went through the process with the state, and then the military started their process. And it was re-traumatizing as fuck.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, horrific. And nothing out of either of those. Nothing. Like, I was made to look like the one who, was lying or had some sort of vendetta against this person, which, I mean, this person was a virtual stranger to me. Like, what do I have against this person that I don't even know, that I would want to, put myself through all of this? So when I hear, people saying all these things about like, well, why now? Or why did she wait? Like, these people, women who go through this, and men, it's men too, but mostly women, it's traumatizing. It's and a natural response to trauma is you don't want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. You want to avoid every single reminder of it because, it triggers you, and it triggers these intense emotions for those who develop PTSD. Which a high number of rape survivors, develop PTSD because of how traumatic that the assault was. And so it's like, if people really understood trauma and really understood what women are up against in trying to report these things, and like I mentioned, sometimes that's even before going to the police, I don't think I would have had the courage, or I was so confused and so traumatized. Like, I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't had wise. It was actually my younger brother, who was like, no, you absolutely need to go to the hospital, because I didn't know what to do. Mm-hmm. I was so just like not in a good state, right? Obviously. And he was like, no, you go to the hospital. Like, he literally had to tell me what to do and then call the police. And if I hadn't had that wise, because I had other people telling me, oh, it's not, that big of a deal. But if I hadn't had like his stern and wise advice, like literally telling me what to do as a woman in my early 30s, mid 30s, I don't know that I would have even had the presence of mind in the moment to have done that.
Yeah.
And so when I think about like, that's the state I was in my 30s because of the trauma of the situation. And then we're talking about girls who go through this when they're 12 or 15 or 18 or 25. I'm just like, there's a lot of reasons why women don't come forward, a lot. Mm-hmm. And like I said, some of that can have to do with trauma. Some of that has to do with like, we've heard, like I said earlier, we've heard those stories about how women are treated. We've had friends who've gone through that and tried to report, and we've heard how they were treated by the criminal justice system, or they've tried to tell their parent. I mean, I know so many women and girls that like have tried to tell, and even men that have tried to tell their parents, that, and the parents like victim blame them. And so if you're dealing with that as like a 16-year-old girl, and your, parent is telling you, oh, it's your fault, or you shouldn't dress that way, of course you're not going to go to the police. And so I think a lot of times it takes, because we live in such a messed up society in this area as well, sometimes it may not be until 10 or 15 or 20 years later that person realizes with clarity what they went through, right? Like, oh, that thing that my mom told me, or that other people, when they victim blame me, that's actually not true. And I was assaulted, and this isn't okay. I mean, sometimes it takes a really long time, unfortunately, to get that clarity and to move forward. So anyways, lots of reasons. Like I said, I hadn't planned on sharing all that, but lots of reasons why women don't report often until years later. And then, like I said, even when we do, it's like 1% to 2%, less than that even ever go to jail. So, it's not even, I wouldn't say it's not worth it, because every person has to make that decision for themselves. But in my case, I often wonder, like, how much further along would I be in my healing process and in rebuilding my life if I hadn't spent a year and a half being continued to be screwed over by the legal system. I can't call it the justice system anymore. Like, I can't call it, it's not justice.
Yeah, that's fair.
There isn't justice. Like, I can't call it the justice system. And, it was really strange for me during this process when I was going through all that, to be like, man, I just spent, 2 years studying, like, being involved in activism against police brutality and seeing all these cases of Black folks that, are killed, and then seeing, these non-indictments, or, all this injustice in the legal system towards Black folks. And then pretty much a few weeks after I graduated, I find myself in the same boat for a different reason, right? But facing injustice in the legal system towards women. And I think all those situations, whether it's race or gender, it's like the legal system, like everything else in this country, was not initially created for the protection of Black folks or for women. It wasn't created for our benefit or our protection. It was created to benefit and protect white men. And so when people say, like, oh, the system's broken, it's broken. Well, yeah, on one hand, it is broken and desperately needs reform. But on another hand, it's actually not broken. It's actually still functioning the way it was created to function. I just got off on a long tangent there.
Well, if I can say, thank you for sharing. And I only can hope that, you sharing that and somebody listening to that, it empowers them or informs them or educates them and helps them make a more informed, decision about what they want to do when faced with, or if they've already been faced with that situation. So,
and I think, go ahead.
I was just saying that was, I think that was good.
Well, and to kind of, I don't know, tie that in with another term that I feel like is, that I was just discussing with a friend a few days ago, is this term intersectionality. Have you heard this term before?
I have, not in great detail. Can you do me a favor though, before you go there?
Yes.
Can you hang on to that real quick? Don't lose your thought. I was thinking while you were saying a lot of things you were just saying. I don't know why people they can't seem to question their belief, whatever that is, whether that's if they believe in the police, if they believe in the military, if they believe in the government, whatever it is, whatever it is they believe in, or which could be a number of things. I find big issue with people who can't question their beliefs. And I feel like a lot of people feel like that's wrong for some reason.
Wrong to question their beliefs.
Wrong to question their beliefs. And it feels like their beliefs almost have to be tribal, like in nature, where it's like all in or nothing.
Or they're patriotic. They're being patriotic.
Right. And I think that's extremely unfortunate because there could be all kind of reasons why someone's doing that. Me personally, I would say, like if, for example, if it's a white male, I would find it more difficult for him to do that as far as like society, because it's set up for him.
Right.
So why would he, attack something that's benefiting him? I think it would take some kind of a person to do that.
Right.
And like, for example, with Obama, like I'll just use him as an example. I voted for Obama and President Obama. And even in doing that, I was able to question him on a lot of things he did. And I didn't agree with everything he did.
Right. It's not like this blind allegiance.
Right. Which we've been accused of. I mean, black people. And I'm like, these are little differences that I try to point out to people. I'm like, you can't question anything Donald Trump does. You can't question anything the Republican Party does. You can't question anything that you believe in. I'm able to question things that I believe in because I think that's necessary. And I'm saying all this to relate to how you were kind of talking about how you went through like the police and the military, and it sounds like people were kind of like, well, no, they wouldn't do that, or I don't know,
right?
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. Well, because he, my perpetrator was a captain in the Air Force.
Well, why would he do that? Because he's an
upstanding
citizen.
He's a hero. He's serving. He's giving his life for this country. He's a good intrinsically, right? Like a flawless person. He couldn't have done this.
Right.
Right.
And I hate that.
Yeah. When reality shows that sexual assault in the military is a massive issue. And of course they have all this rhetoric around, oh, no tolerance, no tolerance. I mean, I actually called out one of the guys that was doing and handling the investigation, my case, but on the military side. And, when they made that phone call that I'll never forget, he was like stuttering. He was this like super confident, like the first time I talked to him, he was like, hey, I'm Captain so-and-so, and I've been head of blah, blah, blah for 10 years, like super confident, like in control. And then that phone call, when he called me to tell me that they weren't going to do anything, he was literally stuttering, like, well, I, just called to tell you, for like a minute.
It's like he
knew. I'm like, he obviously knew. He knew. What he was about to tell me was a load of bullshit. I mean, we had everything. We had a taped confession. We had DNA. I mean, we had everything. Like, what more do you need? Besides, like, what, you want a videotape? Like, it's not realistic. Like, we had all the evidence.
And even then,
and I went to the police right away, and I, cooperated. So when people are always like, well, she didn't do this right, I'm like, no, that's not actually it. Because here's somebody who did everything, quote unquote, right. And I'm not shaming anyone who doesn't do these things, because some people aren't able to. Like, I had a really good support system around me, and it was still one of the most difficult things I've ever been through, to go through the legal process. Mm-hmm. So, some people just aren't in a position to be able to do that. But yeah. Oh, wait, what? I lost my train of thought. But yeah, we put people up on these pedestals, and it's like with the case, and this ties back in. It's kind of like the whole people thinking of white supremacy in this very extreme version of the KKK. It's the same with this. Like, people who are sexually abusing children, or men who are rapists, like, these are everyday people. These are police officers. These are captains in the Air Force. These are, doctors. Like, we saw that with that whole Larry Nassar. I mean, hundreds of women girls that he sexually abused in the time of his, over the course of his practice. Like, these are people in the pulpit, right? These are your neighbor. But we don't want to think about that because, one, it's scary, right? That's really scary. Right. And I get that. So we don't want to, we want to think of rapists as like these men who jump out of the bushes, these strangers. And the truth is, like, the vast majority of women are assaulted by someone they know. This is someone they know. It's not a stranger hiding in the bushes. But that's scary it's scary to think about, especially if you're like a parent with kids. And I get that. But we've talked about this before. Like, I'm the kind of person that, like, I want to know the truth of something, even if it's scary, even if it's disturbing, even because how else are we supposed to navigate this world in a truthful, holistic, like, honest way if we're burying our heads in the sand and we don't even want to look at the reality of the society we live in, So yeah, captain in the Air Force, and had aspirations. He had also been in the medical field before and had aspirations of becoming an anesthesiologist. Like, if that isn't scary as hell,
shit,
I don't know what is. I mean, like, I'm not even kidding you right now.
Because he's taking some of that stuff home.
Oh my gosh.
That was a huge accusation, by the way.
What's that?
So I just made a huge accusation, by the way. But if you got a person that's willing to, to do what he did,
he's a predator.
What's he going to do? He's going to pocket some of that stuff. I think
right.
Take it home.
Exactly. He's a predator. And this is something, like, I learned so much through this process. Sorry, we're getting off on such a tangent right now. But, we always think of, I think in the popular imagination, right? In the same way we think about white supremacists as KKK and rapists as being strangers in the bushes, we think of predators, or we use that terminology often to describe people who are abusing children, right? But it's like, no, this is a grown man, almost 40 years old, who is a predator, preying on, well, probably children too. I have reasons to believe children too, in his case, but also preying on grown women, right? So, like, that was also kind of one of the many light bulbs I had during this process, because he, prior to the assault, went through the whole process of grooming me, just like you read about predators grooming children, like setting them up to trust them and tell, like, all these things to gain trust and gain access and gain like privacy with this person to be able to do what they're going to do. He did all that with me in a very short period of time, was very skilled at it, very skilled, creepily skilled. And so, yeah, anyways, we're getting off on
but
a lot of topics here,
but good information. And it just gives me ideas for things we can talk about, definitely more in depth in the future.
Yeah. And what I was going to say earlier about this intersectionality.
Yeah, I was going to bring it right back to it.
Are we cool with going there now?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So really, we're really not, like, off topic, right? Not that we have a set topic we have to talk about. But intersectionality is, so it's a term by Kimberly Crenshaw. So I'm going to give that acknowledgement where it's due, because I think this term is amazing. It was definitely, like, this huge light bulb for me when I understood what this term is. So basically, this term intersectionality describes the fact that we all have multiple layers or multiple identities, right? And multiple aspects to who we are. So for instance, just to give an easy example, right? So someone can face oppression or marginalization or discrimination based on their race. Say you're a Black person in the U.S., right? Mm-hmm. You're going to face racism. But if that person is also a Black woman, then they're also going to face oppression based on being a woman, right? All these things we just talked about. Mm-hmm. So that's like intersectionality. There are multiple levels where someone can, and multiple ways that someone can experience oppression. So if you add on to that, right, say someone is Muslim, right, in this country where Christianity is the predominant religion and the social quote unquote norm, right? Society's built around Christian holidays and catering to Christianity. So if you're Muslim, that's another intersection.
Hold on. I think that's a great point you just made that I don't think people realize, is that our holidays are centered around the Christian religion. It's a very simple thing, but I don't think people realize that.
Right.
That's all.
It's like we get all this time off for, Christmas or whatever. Well, what if you're a Muslim and you don't celebrate Christmas? Are you getting time off work to celebrate your religious holidays? No,
No.
you're not. I
I made this joke. It wasn't even a joke. I don't know what it was yesterday, just really quick. Somebody asked me if I had Monday off, with it being Martin Luther King Day, I believe. And I said, no, we don't have Monday off. I was like, my company's racist.
I'm a black man. I don't get Dr. King's day off.
And I do stuff like that to push buttons sometimes because
Right.
I think it's kind of funny, but no.
But yeah, so not to just overly emphasize this point, but with the intersectionality, you can keep adding on, say you're part of the LGBTQIA community, right? That adds another layer. So basically that there's just lots of different areas where people can face discrimination, oppression, marginalization. And just because you understand oppression in one of those areas doesn't mean you understand oppression in all across the board, right? You can be a black man, but that doesn't mean you don't have a lot to learn about how, women are oppressed, or you can be a white person who's part of the LGBTQ community, but then you understand oppression from that level, but you don't understand maybe racial oppression, so there's just all these different layers. And then I think it's also an important point to note that intersectionality works the other direction too. I don't think this was the original maybe intent of or definition of the term, but basically people's privilege is intersectional too, right? So just kind of flip that around. If you're, white in this country, that gives you certain privileges, racial privileges, and certain blinders that you're going to have, and certain ways that you might be enacting oppression, reinforcing, white supremacy or racism towards others. But then you can add to that, what if you're white and you're male? Then you also have the privilege of not having to navigate society as a woman. You have that male privilege. And then what if you're straight? And then what if you're Christian? And then what if you're, then I think those blinders can just build and build and build and build, where it's really hard to see outside of this society that was made for your benefit. And it's really hard to see how other people live. I heard this really interesting analogy one time that it was, it's like a triangle, and it has different levels if you kind of break the triangle up into different levels. And the higher up you go on the triangle towards the little, point, it's that's your privilege, whether it's racial, financial, gender, sexuality. You go higher and higher and higher up in this triangle. And so the analogy is, and obviously the lower you are in these areas of privilege, you'll be lower in the triangle towards the wider part, on the bottom of the triangle. So the analogy is that it's easy for people on the bottom to see up, to see how other people are living in more privileged ways, again, be it wealth, financial wealth, or be it racial privilege, or be it, based on gender. But it's really hard for people towards the top of that triangle to see down, to see how people less privileged are experiencing life and what they're going through. And I think in general, I think that's really true. I think that's really true.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Because I was literally getting ready to ask you about what you were just talking about before you said it. Because I was sitting here thinking to myself while you were talking, I was like, I've had these thoughts, but I've never really spent a lot of time thinking about it. But I me being a black male, I mean, I think the answer to this is very obvious. But I'm I wonder if that allows me to relate more to women's issues and what they might be experiencing as far as discrimination, or Hispanics at the border or whatnot, because I experienced my own kind of issues, and so it's easier for me to understand that they have issues and things that they're dealing with.
Right, exactly. It looks a little different, but you already have like a frame of reference
Yeah.
for marginalization and oppression. And so it's not as hard, I think, right?
Right.
We talked about this in my own experiences growing up, right? That being a woman of color, right? Even though I'm not Black, but it was easier for me once I finally, I mean, it took a long time, but once I finally started really getting things, I think it was easier to understand because I already knew that racism existed and I already knew that these things were reality, but just learning how that exists differently for other people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's it's very true.
That's interesting really quick. And also how you said it works the other way. I've never heard anybody say that. But it's kind of those things where like you just kind of know these things, but you put language to the things that are happening. You put words to it. Like I was saying with cognitive dissonance, like we know it's been happening, but we didn't know that word or how to articulate it. So when you say it works the other way, saying like, you know, if you could be a white male Christian, I don't know, in the military, you know, heterosexual former cop.
Able-bodied former cop, right?
You know? And I'm not saying all those things are bad, but I'm saying that could create issues as far as seeing reality.
Exactly. Of what other people go through.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and actually one of my friends that I was discussing our last podcast with, she brought that up. She wrote down a couple notes of things that stood out to her. This might bring some heat by me mentioning this, but I don't even remember saying this or you saying this, but she said that one of us said something about white men who think they have all the answers or something. I don't even remember this, so I'd have to go back and listen. But that's what got us into talking about this intersectionality, because I was telling her, like, yeah, like I've had hundreds of conversations with people about racism over the past how many ever years, right? And unfortunately, you know, you start to see patterns, right? When you do something over and over and over and over again, patterns start to emerge. And, you know, unfortunately, in my experience, a lot of my most stubborn, most angry, most hostile, most closed-minded people tend to be white men. And that's not always the case, but most often. And I think that's because there's all those layers of privilege and power, and that just make that bubble that they're in can make it just smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, where it's like they think their experience of the world is the norm, is the experience. The experience that everyone has. And it's like, well, I haven't, you know, so many people like, I feel like walk around with this attitude of, well, I haven't experienced, so if I haven't personally experienced it, can't be happening.
Can't be true.
And I'm like, that's the most ridiculous, illogical, and it's like a lot of these things you're not going to experience. Like if you're a male, how are you going to experience like the sexism that women face in the society? You're not going to. Like if you're white,
you're never going to experience it.
Right?
How
like
could you understand it?
How are you going to experience like racism and anti-Black oppression? You're not going to. So if you're like walking around like, until it happens to me, it's not real or it's a lie, then that's a problem. Like it's a huge problem, right? Because this isn't even, you're not even part of the group that's affected. So why would you think that this is going to happen to you? Why is that your litmus test for the truth of these realities? Like it has to happen to me. And I mean, those were a lot of the arguments I would get in. Like I remember years ago, before I did a nice big Facebook cleaning out, there was this white, straight Christian man, able-bodied man from the era where I grew up, who, you know, we were talking about police brutality towards Blacks, and he's like, well, I've been pulled over by the police and I've always been treated with the utmost respect. And that was his like argument as to why, you know, there couldn't be anything wrong.
I've heard that
like
one.
Happening.
I've heard that one before.
And I'm just like, and that proves what? Like, okay, why did you even bring that up? That's not even relevant to this conversation. We're not talking about white men being pulled over by police. We're talking about black people. Like, so why is that even relevant? Like, why are you even bringing that up? Next. Next.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, intersectionality, like I said, big fan. Lots of thanks to Kimberly Crenshaw for that, because I think it's huge.
So we're an hour and a half in, and we've covered 3 terms.
We haven't even talked about racism. That's like the most important term, like systemic racism versus interpersonal. Mm-hmm. But we can do that next time. But yeah, we didn't even get to that.
How are you doing here on time? What are you looking at?
I'm okay on time.
You want to do one more? You want to do?
Let's do that one.
You want to do racism or what you were saying there?
Yeah, let's do that one.
Okay.
Because I think that one's probably the most important. Okay. Break this up into a 2-parter, so people aren't like, oh my gosh, I don't have time for this 2.5-hour podcast.
Yeah.
Okay. Ready to launch?
Go ahead.
Okay. So we kind of talked about this a little bit, I think, in a off the podcast conversation we were having, is that I think a lot of misunderstandings happen between white folks and people of color in conversations about racism, because a lot of times, I mean, there's lots of reasons for that, but I think a lot of times we're not even defining terms the same way, right? And so I think I had expressed to you, like, when I talk about racism, occasionally I'm talking about, and this isn't even like an official term, this is just what I call it to distinguish it from systemic racism. I call it like interpersonal racism, right? So like something that's happening between 2 people, or on a micro level, like 2 people or a small group of people. I think that's what most white folks think of when they think of racism. Like, oh, somebody called you the N-word, or somebody didn't hire you because they're white and you're Asian, and they you know, are assuming you're whatever, these stereotypes about you.
Yeah.
But in academia, in the study of racism, and where I'm coming from when I talk about racism, the majority of the time, 80% of the time, I'm talking about systemic institutional racism. And that's something that I think systemic racism, institutional racism, is not like a commonly understood term in this country. Like, I think there's pockets of people, like activists or Black folks, or, you know, that maybe understand the systemic nature of racism in this country. But I think for the most part, people think of this micro level, and they're not thinking of the macro. And you have to understand the macro to understand the society and why we are where we are. So Let's talk about, what is systemic racism? What does that mean? What is institutional racism? Well, first of all, like I always say, you should Google it, because there's a lot of good definitions out there. There's a lot of, you know, dig into it, figure this out. But just kind of a brief summary of what is meant by that is, you know, racism in this country wasn't just like, oh, these white people that are in the KKK or these slaveholders don't like these people and they're oppressing them. It was like those beliefs, so like the white supremacist beliefs, like what we talked about earlier, racist beliefs, were put into law, right? Like, and we kind of know this, right? Like Jim Crow laws, like it was in the laws of this country, like segregation. But
Leah, that was so long ago.
Right. Bear with me. Thank you for bringing that up. What a great point, Matt. I'm so glad you said that. I've never heard that before. But so you have to understand, right, that racism in this country was embedded into our laws on every single level, like education, the legal system, all these different ways. And so that's what we mean by systemic. It's in the systems, institutional racism. It's in our institutions. It's been institutionalized on a macro level.
I don't think people even know that. What you just said, I don't think people even know that.
Right.
What systemic means.
We don't think about that part of it. And maybe it's easier for people to understand, you know, like last podcast when we were talking about apartheid in South Africa, that's what I was saying, the power in naming the system. Like apartheid isn't talking about, oh, this interpersonal racism. Apartheid is referring to this vast system of racist laws that this entire, the modern day society of South Africa was built on. And that's why, and it's the same in the US, right? Our entire, you know, basically to take it way back there in the day, right? We had colonizers. We like to refer to them as pilgrims, but really they were colonizers who came to this country and started to enact genocide towards indigenous people, towards native peoples. And they were the ones that started to build, you know, the government of this country and the law enforcement and the education system out of these white supremacist ideas and values. So of course that's going to be the kind of laws they're putting into effect and the kind of systems that they're putting into effect. And so, you know, back to your point that you brought up, but that was so long ago. Well, here's the thing. When something is systematized and institutionalized, that's not just going to go away. That's embedded in the laws and in the institutions of our country, in our government, in everything. And so just because, you know, some of those laws were changed, you know, like slavery became illegal or Jim Crow laws or segregation became illegal. So yeah, some of those racist laws, some of those institutionalized racist laws were repealed.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean the entire system has been changed, right? So we still have a lot of, and that's basically what, like, these conversations about mass incarceration of Black and brown people, that's what that's getting at, is basically saying the whole prison system, which includes the police force, because they're the ones that are feeding into the prison population. That whole system is built on white supremacy and built on racism. That's systematized, that's institutionalized in our prison system. Michelle Alexander has a book, you know, The New Jim Crow is what she titled it, right? Mm-hmm. That's about mass incarceration. That's why she gave it that title. She's basically saying Jim Crow was how systemic racism was manifesting, you know, 60 whatever years ago. Now we're highlighting mass incarceration. Not that it's a new thing. That's been around for forever, but now we're highlighting that. So yeah, just because some of those racist laws have been changed, there are still plenty of racist laws that are, and systems that are still functioning as designed. And it kind of gets back to tie it in too with what I said earlier about, you know, the laws in this country weren't created to protect people of color or women or Muslims, or they were created to protect a certain population. And until we change that, it's still functioning that way, right? Like it's still, so in the case of women, you know, it's like women, it used to be illegal for women to own land, or illegal for women to file for divorce, or illegal for women to work or go to school, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where we started. And yeah, some of those things have changed or changed somewhat over the years, but not everything has been corrected yet, right? And so there's still a lot of work left to be done. And so that's also why I say, I make comments all the time about, you know, if people are upholding or maintaining the status quo in this country, then you're likely supporting white supremacy, or you're likely upholding sexism or patriarchy or homophobia, because the status quo in this country from the beginning of like the US as a nation state was built on those things: patriarchy, sexism, white supremacy, racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, right? And so today, because a lot of those things are still playing out today, systemically, then if you're, just, people always want to think like, oh, I just want to be neutral. Like, I'm a peacemaker. I love peace, right? Like, namaste.
Yeah.
I'm just going to be neutral.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, neutrality, right? And I'm not the first person who said this. There's been plenty of other people who've said this, right? Like, neutrality, staying quiet, that always supports the oppressor. That never supports the oppressed. Like, the oppressed never make progress without a fight and blood, sweat, and tears, and many people giving their lives. Like, that's how it works. And so when I hear people say things like that, I'm like, okay, but you're on the wrong side of the fence, whether you realize it or not, by your quietness, by your peace, quote unquote, by your neutrality. Right. You're actually supporting oppression. And that's, a big part of like why I open my big mouth a lot is because I believe that. I believe we need more people to speak out. I believe we need more people that are willing to face the backlash, or white lash, as I call it, in concerning issues of racism. Like, more people willing to go there and face whatever it is that you have to face, because that's the only way that change is brought about. Yeah. And I also think about this when people talk about, oh, like, those conversations that people are like, I don't know if I should say this, but I'm going to say it anyways, about how, oh, well, racism is just going to naturally kind of die out, right? Because all the racists are old people. And so once that generation kind of dies off, then we're just like magically going to be in a better place. Or when people say things about, oh, well, look at all the like interracial marriages and mixed folks and all the, mingling that's happening. So we're all going to be brown and racism is just going to go away. Like, no, that's not how.
I'm guilty of that, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
Well, you're not going to offend me. No, I've been guilty of saying things like that in the past.
Right. It's like, if we look at the history in this country of people who've been oppressed, none of that has ever gotten better without literally like bloodshed and lots of work and protests and advocacy and sit-ins and people, like advocating for legislative change. And I mean, it's taken work. So if we think like we're just gonna sit back and somehow we're in a new era and things are just gonna magically work themselves out, like, no, the reason we're in a new era right now is because of people's work. Like, activists and advocates and people are working to bring light, hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag Me Too. People are working to go against the status quo and to bring alternate narratives and other information to public awareness. So it's work. Like, if we're in any sort of better place now than we were 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 2 years ago, right? It's because people have put in work to make that happen. And so, yeah, I mean, that's not maybe what people want to hear, but I feel like that's how these things work if we look back historically. And then, with the whole like, oh, well, by 2050, we're all going to be brown or whatever people think. It's like, are people not aware of colorism? Like, just because so many people are a shade or two darker or whatever people think is going to happen in the next 30 years, white supremacy is still, that doesn't mean that's going to go away.
It will evolve.
Well, it will evolve. And we know that like the whole lighter is better, right? It's not just that white is right. There's also colorism, right? Where lighter is better, right? Because the closer you are to whiteness, the better you are, right? It's that idea. That's not going to go away just because some people are a little darker, So anyways, there's my cynicism. There's my realism.
If I could put a quick real life example to what you just said, have you seen the trailer for the movie Us?
I haven't.
Did you see Get Out?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
So the director is Jordan Peele.
Yes.
I believe.
Oh, and he's yes. You're right. You're right.
And so he's got this movie called Us that's coming out.
Okay.
And the thing, if you noticed about Jordan Peele, his cast of black people are usually dark. Right.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
And so when the trailer for Us come out, like when we get done, just go check it out. Just YouTube it. It stars Lupita Nyong'o.
Yes.
And,
amazing.
And there's another guy from Black Panther, a really dark guy, not as dark as Lupita, and the kids are really dark, and so it's a really dark cast. Okay,
which that's intentional.
It's
right?
very
That's
intentional, right?
intentional.
It's so some people don't notice that, and so I've asked, and you can just guess who kind of gives me these responses. I talk to black people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, like I can't wait to see it." And I've gotten some really lukewarm responses from non-black people. I won't say just white people, from non-black people, and
that don't understand the importance and the significance of that.
Right, but what they'll say is like, yeah, I saw the trailer. It's not for me.
Whatever. Right.
Right. And it's
not understanding the importance of the representation and who's being represented. These are dark-skinned black folks, not, which is often not who Hollywood chooses to cast.
And that's not appealing to certain groups of people.
Right.
It could even be black people.
Exactly.
Like you were saying with colorism, like it could be because you're so ingrained with seeing certain people on the big screen. You put up these really chocolate black people, and forgive me if that offends anybody. I'm black; I can say what I want. You put up these really dark black people, and like some people are not into it, and I don't even think they even know why.
Right, because we're not used to blackness being upheld as beautiful or upheld as desirable or upheld as pursuable, right?
Yeah.
Or if it is blackness, it's light-skinned blackness.
Yeah.
I might get in trouble here too. I'm not black, so I can't say what I want.
So
there's that.
I've been cataloging these like responses just mentally. And like I've heard, like I said, non-black people just look at the trailer and say, like, "Yeah, like I saw it. Yeah, I don't think I want to see it." I was like, I wonder why.
You know what? I think about this a lot as, because as much like internal work as I've done to undo all of my like racist conditioning and all of that, there's still like things that'll pop up for me sometimes that I'm like, wait a minute, like what's going on here? Let's introspect. Let's figure this out. So speaking of this, here comes another confession. So over the years, I have occasionally followed some seasons of The Bachelor or The Bachelorette. I know. I'm going to be judged.
We're all allowed,
I'm going to be judged.
Or, guilty pleasures.
And I haven't for a couple years, but the last season that I followed they had a black bachelorette. Rachel, I think was her name. This was a couple years ago. And I was so intrigued because, The Bachelor and Bachelorette typically features a very certain, especially as the Bachelor or the Bachelorette, right? It's usually someone white, like super good looking, blah blah blah, straight. It's a very like certain category. And a lot of the people they bring on there as the potential hopeful lovers also fit into those categories. And so I'm of course always analyzing like racial dynamics and all these dynamics that are playing out. So I was super intrigued to watch this. This is the first like Black Bachelorette, like what, like racism, issues of race are going to come up, right? Like, so I was kind of intrigued to watch this show and analyze all this. Well, about halfway through or something, I don't even remember what thought I had or what popped into my mind, but something was like bothering me or felt weird. And I was like, what is happening here? And as I like dug into it, I realized it was a new experience for me to see a Black woman be like the object of men's pursuit, men of all races, Black men, Asian men, white men, that I wasn't used to seeing that on TV.
Yeah.
And I was like, damn.
That's how deep this goes.
That's how deep this goes. That somebody who's like, I'm committed to like getting this stuff out of me and recognizing this stuff when it's happening, that was more like a visceral response before. And I had to like think through it to even, it wasn't like something I immediately recognized.
Yeah, but it's not normal.
That you don't see that.
Right.
Because Black women are portrayed in very negative ways. White women are held up as the standard of beauty. So what does that mean for Black women? That the opposite side of that coin is, if white women are the standard of beauty and white features and white skin and straight hair, then there's obviously the opposite message for Black folks and for Black women. And so to see that playing out, for her being, to be this like object of desire that all these men were just competing to, be with her, it was like, damn, I've rarely seen that on TV. And you can't, and that feeds into, again, everything we talk about these things we internalize. That feeds into, like, you're internalizing that in one way or another. Again, whether you recognize it or not. And I didn't until that moment. What was happening?
You want to hear something crazy?
Of course I do. I've confessed lots of things this episode.
Beyond Black men, loving Black women, you know who else loves Black women?
Uh-oh. Who?
White men love Black women. Secretly. In my opinion. I've seen
an interesting thought. Go ahead.
I could even take this back as far as slavery, because me and my mom have talked pretty in depth about this. As far as the raping, of Black women, like why are the masters always running out and sleeping with the Black women if they're so nasty,
right?
If they're so, like, what are you doing? Why are you out there having the sex with them, right?
Right.
This goes out. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying this goes back to slavery. Why dudes love Black women? It's the same things that you see today with, I think we talked about it last episode, where you'll have some white people appropriate Black culture. They love it. They love it. They love it. They'll never tell you that, though. They love it.
But it's this weird mix of like love and hate, or love and dehumanization, or love and, but I still think it's inferior, right? It's often this strange mix, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Absolutely.
not just love. When you say like love, it's
I'm not
love.
gonna.
Like
I don't want a blanket
up.
statement. Everything. I'm speaking very generally here, loose.
Right.
I'm not being very responsible with my
with your words.
with my words. I'm just talking shit.
Matthew, be responsible with your words.
Words are important. But I've seen a lot of that in my life where white guys will often have affection for some Black women, but they won't it'll be secret.
Right.
Won't be real exposed, and
or it's real fetishy.
Yeah.
Well, but back to what I have to throw this in there because this goes along with what you just said about historically white men and black women and the rape and all of that. But I wish I could remember who said this. I just heard this or read this like a couple weeks ago, and I'm blanking on who it was. So I'll have to do my research to figure out who to credit it to. But it was basically, to summarize, it was like, back in the day, white men were anti-segregationist in the daytime, but they were pro-integration at night.
Yeah.
Right. And it's basically getting to what you just talked about. And obviously that quote is leaving out the horrors and the power discrepancy and the rape and the assault and, all of that. It's kind of like sanitizing it a little bit, but you get the point. It's like these, and I'm generalizing, but in general, right, white folks that were like, no, we can't integrate, that's wrong, and pro-segregation. But then in the bedroom, right, or
right.
It was a whole different story.
And maybe we can get into that a little bit next time we talk, because I think last time we were speaking, we were just getting into racial fetishes.
Yes,
so
and I was super pumped and kind of nervous, but mostly pumped to talk about that today.
Yeah.
But yes.
So how far do we get with your terms?
I think we hit the biggest ones. I think some of the most important ones. I always think systemic institutional racism is the biggest one that people need to understand. If I can tell y'all to go do your homework and go read and Google and talk and figure it out until you can explain what that is to other people. They say like you don't really know something until you can effectively teach it to someone else. So if there is a certain like one term that I would emphasize that people really need to understand in detail, it's that systemic institutional racism. Okay. And then, so I think we've hit, I think colorblindness could be another really good one to hit. There's others. There's always others. But I think some of those will naturally come up in our conversations too.
Yeah, and maybe when they come up, we can make sure we take a second to...
Yeah, I'll try to be intentional about breaking some of those down a little bit more as we move forward. Okay. Oh, and internalized racism, which that one should be kind of maybe self-explanatory, but I think that one's really important too, which we've kind of talked about that one a lot, I think last time and this time. But
okay.
Yeah, I think we covered most of the big ones.
Okay. Well, this is approximately 15 minutes longer than our last one. We're over the 2-hour mark. And you know what? I'm going to put this all in one episode. I'm like, just chew on this steak. Okay? Chew on this really
of course you are.
Big,
I already had
juicy
complaints last time that it was too long, and now we've gone even longer. But hey, whatever.
I don't know.
Serve it all up.
There's a podcast I listen to. It's called Trumpcast. And their episodes are like 30 minutes tops, and and they do it.
It's too short.
And I'm always wanting more. I'm like, what?
Okay.
Wait. Oh.
See, because you and I are people. I'm getting the sense you're somebody that likes long, deep conversations, right, about this kind of stuff. And I am too.
Yeah.
Or you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. I wouldn't be your guest if I didn't enjoy this, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I think. If people are hungry enough to learn or to hear or just whatever.
Yeah, this is not the Fluff Podcast. You listened to that one episode when I had the other podcast guest on, Speak Between the Lines, and we had a lot of fun there.
Your fun is over. Fun time is over.
But the whole point, and I'm learning this as I go, and it's evolving, but the whole point of the Grip podcast was to get a grip on life.
Right.
That's why I called it the Grip. And I was like, it's also catchy, the Grip. So, entertainment. And
here we are.
Here we are. And I'm like, that's the whole point, is to get a grip on life, to turn stereotypes on their head, to talk about real issues. I like to have a diverse, group of guests come on and talk about whatever issues they are dealing with in their lives, and I like to get their perspective. So it's not a fluff podcast. You know, I mean, I do some fun things here and there, but I often get accused of being too dramatic and being too,
Oh,
you know, because I'm also a music producer, and a lot of my music is like dramatic sounding. My wife is like, Jesus, Matt, like, could you make something happy? I'm like, life is not happy. Life is sad and
life has
dramatic.
been a struggle. You don't know what it's like out here in these streets.
You know, so I
But
I want substance.
well, but in all seriousness, right? I mean, I think it is easier for some folks to focus on or to be light and fluffy if that's been more of their life experience. I mean, we all deal with crap in life. Like, nobody gets out of that. But, you know, some people deal with a lot of crap. Back to the intersectionality thing. So, like,
Yeah.
you know, I'm just kind of like, this is my life. Like, this is what my life has been. And if that's too serious for you, like, I don't know. Maybe my personality just isn't for you, or maybe your life has been easier and so you haven't had to think about these things as much, or I don't know. I mean, I'm not making a blanket statement. I realize, like, people that are more serious, like myself, like, I need to intentionally have times where I am not serious and I have fun, and, you know, that's important too.
Yeah, balance is
But
important.
yeah. But I think I'm more focused on, like you, kind of the elephants in the room, or the truth people want to avoid that we really need to look at, because avoiding it's really hurting us.
Yeah, otherwise I'm like,
you know,
like, what are we doing here?
like, nothing's ever solved by sweeping issues under the rug. And I think about that a lot. You know, like, in what area of life, you know, like, think about a relationship, a dating relationship, or a spouse. Like, you're just going to sweep things under the rug? Does that work?
Nope.
Does that work? How does that work out for you? Right? Like, it doesn't work. And yet, as a society, we try to do the very same thing with topics that are hard or we don't want to look at. And it's not going to get us anywhere.
Right.
You know? So might as well talk about it.
Yeah.
And have a little fun while we're at it, right? We had some jokes in there.
I had a joke
Like
or two.
2.
Yeah. Just probably actually 2.
I laugh a lot.
Yeah.
That's humorous, right?
I guess so. So, let me see here. That's pretty much it. I guess we'll wrap up there at the 2 hour and 6 minute mark, and we'll pick up. I don't know. I got some guests coming on next week, and we're gonna talk about religion and aliens. And
Wow, fascinating. Don't miss that.
okay, because I have some strong opinions about that.
Religion and aliens. When you said diverse guests, you weren't joking, were you?
Yeah, and I'll give you just a sneak peek about what I'm going to talk about
Oh
for
my
you
gosh.
and the listeners. So this is
I'm scared.
this is an unpopular opinion I have.
Okay.
Okay, so God, right? If you believe in God, you gotta let me get through this.
I can't. I'm like laughing already. Sorry.
So God, if you believe in God, is a being somewhere, existing somewhere. We'll just say that.
Okay.
I won't say on a planet, in space, wherever you believe God might be, in heaven. I don't know.
Okay.
But if you believe God, you believe God's a being somewhere else,
Okay.
existing somewhere. Wouldn't that be an alien? And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I really don't.
Let's just say I'm grateful that I'm not your podcast guest next week, because I wouldn't even know where to start.
I'm like, I mean, let's talk about it. You know, I'm like, let's get real here. Let's not just talk about what's comfortable. Let's not stay
get
within.
real.
Let's not talk about in the safe box where, God is this being. And let me just say, I do believe in God, and I am a spiritual person. I don't think I'm not a religious person. So, but I
know we're.
go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I know we're trying to wrap this up, but this actually reminds me of a really hilarious story from one of my friends who was like doing some online dating, which, you know,
Uh-oh.
that could be a whole nother podcast, like adventures in online dating. Their stories, right? For anyone who's been there, done that. But it was like this guy that she, you know, like in the beginning, it seemed like everything was cool and everything was going well. And he seemed like fairly normal.
Then he says God's an alien.
I mean, pretty much. No, then he like, I forget what it was. It was some kind of like club that meets that he was all, it was something that had to do with religion and aliens. I don't remember if it was God as an alien or something like that. But he actually had like drove like an hour or 2 hours or something every month or twice a month. I don't remember the details. This is a while back. I'll have to ask my friend. But to like go meet with this group of people that all like held similar beliefs, and this was like a thing, and she was just like, and he felt like super passionate about it. It was like basically like, if you don't believe this, then this is a deal breaker. Like, this is a relationship deal breaker. And she's like, well, I mean, I don't believe this. Like, I'm willing to talk and hear your perspectives, but no, currently I'm not on that train that's coming into the station.
Right.
So anyways, I guess what I'm saying is, like, I could hook you up. You could like go meet with other people.
I don't know about that guy, because it sounds like what he's doing is they have a set of beliefs.
Right.
What I'm doing is exploring the topics.
Oh, okay. You haven't like decided for sure. You sounded pretty convinced. Oh,
no,
okay.
I'm asking questions, and this actually goes back to that thing I was saying. Being able to question your beliefs and critically think about things that are fed to us, whether that's Christianity, religion,
right,
or life outside of Earth. And like with that, for example, if there's a bug on Mars, that's an alien.
Okay.
It's another life form. So it's like I say, I like to think deeply and critically about these things because it's interesting. It's not just racism.
I am not just a black man who wants to talk about racism, okay?
Intersectionality.
I also want to talk about aliens. Intersection.
Okay.
Oh, Lord. I'm going to regret
layers.
Everything I've brought up.
Layers. I got some really neat sci-fi movie ideas we're going to work on together, okay? We're going to incorporate racism and aliens and all kind of stuff into it, man.
Oh, my goodness.
We're going to be huge.
Hey, it could be like a good movie, maybe. Science fiction movie.
Yeah.
JK, giving you a hard time.
Yeah.
But seriously. Okay, well, you have fun with that.
I will. I'm planning on it.
Let me know how that goes.
And I'm going to ask you after the episode, I'm going to quiz you like, did you listen?
Oh, I'll listen. Don't worry. And I'll probably have some feedback. Don't you worry.
Yeah. So that's next week, folks. Tune in next Sunday.
My gosh.
Tomorrow, this will be out.
Awesome. Yay.
This episode.
Looking forward to hearing myself. Sounds super weird.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Well, thank
again. You so much. It's been fun. It's been good. As usual, have a great weekend.
Of many conversations we probably will be having.
Yeah. Tune in next time. We got to leave that, what do they call it? Like where you dangle it before them.
Cliffhanger.
Tune in next time for racial fetishes. I know we said that last time, but we're serious this time. Maybe.
Maybe. I think we should be able to get there.
Okay. Sounds good.
I'll get with you on the date.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your weekend.
You too, Leah.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Okay. So there we have it. Episode 17. Hopefully this is a reference episode where you can come back and listen to this and get some kind of general information about the things that we talk about. Let me see if I can find a good outro song here that we can listen to. And again, you can listen to the Grip Podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and you can follow us on Instagram at The Grip Podcast. I mainly do a lot of my promotion there. We're also on Facebook. Again, not on Twitter. Haven't quite figured that out. But that should be it. Thank you for listening.
We'll go out to some Mac Miller here. Rest in peace, Mac Miller. I wasn't a big fan when he was out. I just never got around to listening to him, but unfortunately, after he passed, I started listening to his music and really enjoyed it.